Hello everyone, welcome to Creepy Time Ghost Story channel, where we bring you real horror stories broadcast every day. Tonight, we stand at the edge of a clearing in the backwoods of North Carolina, where the air hangs heavy with pine and cicada songs, but the center of the scene feels wrong, eerily wrong. Emily pauses at the edge of what locals call the Devil's Tramping Ground, a perfect barren circle where nothing grows. The soil inside looks scorched, though no fire has touched it, and grass creeps right up to its edge but dares not cross the boundary. Legends say the devil himself walks in circles here at night, plotting mischief for the world beyond. Others whisper that it's a cursed patch of earth where no life can take root. Emily isn't sure what to believe yet, but one rule is clear enough: if you step inside, you might not be the same when you leave. And just so you know, you probably won't survive this. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with your location and the local time, because I want to know exactly where you are listening from tonight. Now, turn down the lights, turn on the fan for some soothing background music, and let's go on our journey tonight. Emily shifts her backpack higher on her shoulders, scanning the barren circle with a mix of fascination and unease. She's read enough online threads to know some people call it a hoax soil poisoned by chemicals, a trick of old farming mistakes. But the uncanny neatness of the circle, its stubborn refusal to sprout even a weed, doesn't feel like an accident. Her boots crunch on the gravel path as she remembers the oldest story, how for over a century, locals have claimed to see a tall, shadowy figure pacing inside at midnight, moving in endless loops. He's tramping down the earth, they say, and nothing dares grow where he walks. There's history buried here too. During the late 1700s, settlers moving through this region kept diaries. Many described odd fairy rings and blasted patches in the wilderness. One Quaker farmer wrote of an oval clearing where livestock refused to graze, even when starving. His entry described the place as a ground unholy, marked by an unseen hand. It's one of the earliest written references to this very patch of earth. For historians, that diary offers a clue that something peculiar has been unsettling travelers for centuries. Emily crouches at the rim, touching the soil. It feels oddly loose, like ash after a campfire. But her fingers come up clean, no soot or smell of burning. She tosses a pine cone into the circle, half expecting something dramatic. Instead, it just sits there, ordinary and still. Yet her stomach tightens anyway. Some say the circle was the site of ancient rituals. Archaeologists once suggested it might have been a meeting place for native tribes, but no artifacts were found, no tools, no burial grounds, nothing. Just emptiness. Paranormal enthusiasts love to point out that nothing found is exactly the problem. Was it deliberately erased? Or is the land itself rejecting history? She takes a step closer, heart thudding. At the county library, she stumbled on a story about a man named John Bell who camped overnight in the circle during the 1942nd. According to his daughter, he woke the next morning with all his belongings scattered into the woods, his shoes missing, and his horse tied to a tree a mile away. He swore he hadn't moved. Locals laughed, calling it a drunken story. But his account sits quietly in family letters, never disproven. That's the thing about the Devil's Tramping Ground. Everyone has a story and none line up perfectly. It's like the ground itself scrambles truth. Emily's rational mind insists there must be an explanation. Maybe the soil composition is unique. Maybe radiation from a long-forgotten meteor strike prevents growth. Scientists have tested the dirt, pH levels, minerals, toxins. Results? Completely ordinary. Nothing unusual. And yet, nothing grows. Do ghosts really exist? That's the question echoing in her thoughts as she stares at the barren patch. The skeptics say no, and every strange event here is a mixture of superstition and coincidence. But she's standing in front of physical proof, a circle that has resisted explanation for centuries. Maybe the devil doesn't tramp here, but something does. A breeze passes, and Emily feels colder than she should under the August sky. The crickets hush for a moment, as if holding their breath. She imagines invisible footsteps pacing just inside the circle, round and round, etching silence into the dirt. She whispers to herself, "It's just a story," though her voice shakes. The first guideline every hiker shares online is the same: don't step inside the circle at night. Some say even in daylight it isn't safe, though there are brave souls who've tested the superstition. Emily looks up, noticing how the moonlight seems brighter here, as if bouncing harder off the soil, bleaching the space pale. It makes the circle look like a spotlight, a stage waiting for something to appear. She forces herself to sit down at the edge, her feet dangling just shy of the line. Her phone buzzes, a friend texting, "You made it there yet?" She doesn't answer, afraid that even acknowledging her exact location might tempt fate. For all her caution, there's one truth Emily feels deep in her bones. This place is different. Even if she doesn't believe in devils or spirits, she knows she's standing at the seam between ordinary ground and something else. And sometimes, the first step into something else is where every survival rule begins. Emily pushed her pack straps tighter and started down the faint dirt path curling around the circle's edge. The night air pressed against her like a damp blanket, and she caught herself glancing back again and again at that stubbornly barren ground. She reminded herself that hikers came here all the time. It wasn't forbidden land, just haunted land. But the next guideline she remembered was simple: never walk alone after dark near the tramping ground. Of course, Emily was already breaking that one. She thought about how history, real history, has a way of blending with campfire tales. Back in 1861, only a few miles south of here, Confederate and Union skirmishers crossed these very woods. Families abandoned farms, soldiers marched through, and by war's end, diaries told of eerie nights filled with strange torchlights and chanting in the woods. Some thought deserters were meeting secretly. Others swore the devil's tramping ground was where war's horrors gathered like smoke. Those soldiers wrote of waking to screams in the trees but finding no one. Even decades later, veterans would hush their voices whenever someone brought up the circle. Emily kept moving. Pine needles softened her steps, but the woods were restless. Owls hooted overhead, frogs croaked from a swampy pocket, and yet between those natural calls was a rhythm, a steady hush crunch that wasn't hers. She stopped, holding her breath. The sound stopped too. She shook it off, muttering, "Maybe a deer." Except deer don't pace in circles. The second strange event of her night came quickly. She rounded a bend and spotted a backpack leaning neatly against a tree. Not hers, this one was faded green, straps frayed, half unzipped. She scanned the woods for another hiker, but no light, no voice, no motion followed. Emily crouched and tucked the zipper. Inside were two cracked mason jars, each filled with soil that looked suspiciously like the dirt from the barren circle. A collector, a scientist, a prankster, whoever had left it clearly hadn't come back for it. The rules bubbled in her mind again. Don't take anything from the circle. Don't even carry the dirt away. People who do report nightmares, paranoia, losing their sense of direction until they're hopelessly turned around. Some locals whisper about a college student named Brian who, in the late 1992, filled his trunk with jars of that very soil for a research project. Within a week, his car broke down 3 times in different counties, he failed every exam he took, and by semester's end, he dropped out. His classmates joked about the devil sabotaging his GPA. Yet Brian himself insisted it wasn't funny. He said he heard pacing footsteps in every room he entered, even libraries and classrooms. No record shows what happened to him after that spring. Emily let the backpack be. She wasn't about to carry cursed luggage deeper into the forest. And still the big question lingered. Do ghosts really exist? Science says no. But then, how do we explain jars of dead soil, backpacks abandoned mid-study, footsteps that seem to follow you when no one's there? Rational minds argue that humans see patterns in noise, conjure faces in shadows, and hear footsteps in the random crunch of twigs. Maybe Emily's senses were doing the same, yet her skin prickled with every gust of wind as though unseen eyes studied her. She pushed forward until the trees parted enough for moonlight to spill into a smaller clearing. Here she remembered the true story her grandmother once told her. In the 1952nd, two teenage sisters dared each other to camp overnight, right in the circle. By dawn, one had wandered away and wasn't found for hours. She'd been discovered 2 miles south, still asleep against a tree, her shoes missing, her face pale. When she woke, she swore she'd been dreaming of a tall figure pacing, always pacing, who wouldn't let her wake until the sun burned his path away. Her family moved out of state shortly afterward. Never tempt places that don't want you, her grandmother warned. Emily brushed the story aside like a cobweb, but deep down, she understood it. Every forest has its hazards. Snakes, steep gullies, dehydration. But here, the hazard wasn't nature. It was whatever force left soil sterile, chased cattle away, and kept stories alive for centuries. The silence broke again. That hush-crunch rhythm resumed, slow and patient. Emily spun with her flashlight, the beam catching nothing but white bark and dust motes. Yet when she shut it off, the sound carried on, around and around, circling. Not random, deliberate. She quickened her pace, whispering the second guideline like a mantra, "Don't be alone, don't be alone." And as she hurried, a deeper thought clawed its way up. Maybe the rules weren't meant to protect hikers from the land. Maybe they were meant to protect the land from hikers, because whatever walked there wanted its circle undisturbed, and they punished anyone foolish enough to wander in alone. Emily wasn't sure yet if she believed in devils, but she did know one thing. She was out here by herself, breaking the very rule that mattered most. Emily adjusted her headlamp and tried to steady her breathing, but each inhale sounded louder than it should in the stillness of the woods. She whispered under her breath, "Rule 3, never camp overnight inside the circle." She didn't plan to camp there, not tonight. Still, the warning rattled around in her head like a loose marble. The reason for that particular rule stretched far back into history. Local farmers in the early 1800s noticed livestock refusing to cross the barren spot. Horses would rear, cows would low nervously, and even hunting dogs turned back with tails tucked. Records from 1882 tell of one farmer, George McKnight, who tried to prove the superstition false. He staked his wagon inside the circle for the night. The next morning, his horses were found tethered exactly where he left them, except their eyes rolled wildly, their bodies drenched in sweat, as if they'd been running full speed in place all night. McKnight himself swore he'd heard whispers circling the wagon, but saw nothing. His account was published in a local paper, making the Devil's Tramping Ground infamous across the state. Emily replayed that story as she stumbled over a root. Her nerves twitched at every sound, the crackle of pine cones under her boots, the whip of branches in the breeze. And then, another strange event. Ahead, where moonlight fractured across the clearing, she spotted a tent, a real nylon dome tent, modern, with its zipper halfway open. Relief flickered finally. Maybe she wasn't alone. "Hello?" she called softly. No answer. She edged closer. The tent sagged a little, the poles bent as if hastily set. She crouched and tucked the flap aside. Inside lay a thin sleeping bag, half unrolled, and a single boot. Just one. A flashlight rested near the boot, but its batteries were gone. The cover popped off. No pack, no water, no sign of anyone returning. Emily backed away slowly. The rules weren't folklore. They were guardrails. And whoever had stayed here overnight had clearly abandoned everything in the rush. She thought about the modern debates too. Do ghosts exist? Or is the devil's tramping ground just a quirk of soil chemistry and mass hysteria? Botanists have tested the soil, noting unusual levels of copper, zinc, and salt that might prevent growth. Yet others argue the ground should eventually heal itself, but it never does. Skeptics shrug, calling it confirmation bias. Believers argue the consistency of stories across generations can't be ignored. Could the human mind invent identical fears for centuries without cause? Emily shifted her pack and turned her thoughts to a true story she'd heard at a coffee shop inside her city. A man named David once recounted how, in the early 1972, he and 3 friends stayed overnight in the circle to disprove the legends. They brought guitars, whiskey, and laughed their way through the night. Around 2 a.m., their music warped, strings snapping, notes echoing wrong, as if the air itself bent. When they tried to pack up and leave, every flashlight flickered dead, and the road they had driven seemed gone. They walked for what felt like hours, always returning to the same barren circle. When the sun rose, they found themselves sitting exactly where they started, though none remember stopping. David swore he never returned to the woods again. Emily imagined David's panic and gripped her straps tighter. She refused to repeat his mistake. A gust of wind lifted dead leaves into a swirling dance around her ankles. She told herself it was natural, but when the pattern repeated, circling twice, then stopping abruptly, she froze. The woods were full of cues, but this felt choreographed. She thought again about the moral edge buried in these tales. Maybe it wasn't about demons or spirits. Maybe it was about respect. Humans barged into every patch of wilderness, flattening it, extracting from it, naming it as their own. The tramping ground was one of the rare places that seemed to whisper back, "You do not belong here. You cannot own this." Perhaps breaking the rules wasn't about summoning curses, but about violating a boundary too old to understand. The hush-crunch rhythm returned, closer now. Emily flicked her headlamp toward the noise, but the beam only revealed shifting shadows. Her pulse raced. She muttered to herself, "Don't camp here. Don't even stop." And with that mantra, she pressed deeper into the trail, leaving behind the abandoned tent, the scattered sleeping bag, and whatever unseen presence still walked its endless circle. Emily's boots pressed into the dirt trail, crunching pine needles beneath each step. She knew she was supposed to follow the 4th rule. Always mark your path with something you can see in the dark. Locals recommended tying reflective tape to branches or using glow sticks to trace the return route. She'd scoffed earlier, thinking GPS would suffice. But now her phone sat useless in her pocket, its battery draining faster than usual, its compass needle spinning without direction. The forest grew denser here, branches clawing at her sleeves, brambles catching her jeans. She thought of how Civil War deserters once vanished into these same Carolina woods. Historians say some never re-emerged, their bodies unclaimed, their graves unmarked. In 1865, after the war ended, search parties combed the region for missing soldiers, but reported finding nothing, no bones, no uniforms, only a cold stillness, as if the land itself had swallowed them. Was it possible they stumbled across this circle, mistaking it for a safe camp? The idea made Emily shiver. Half an hour later, a strange event drew her attention. The air shifted suddenly, warm one moment, I see the next. She stopped walking. Her headlamp beam caught movement on the ground, pale shapes crawling across the soil. Not bugs, not snakes, mushrooms. They seemed to sprout in fast motion, caps unfurling like hands reaching up. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and when she looked again, the earth was bare, nothing but brown pine needles. She muttered, "Hallucinations," though her throat tightened as she spoke. The debate lingered. Do strange electromagnetic fields twist perception here, or do people truly glimpse something beyond reality? Academic studies note that people exposed to erratic EMF often report the feeling of being watched or seeing things that aren't there. Paranormal enthusiasts argue that's exactly what spirits feed on weak boundaries between senses and the other side. Emily remembered a true story her grandmother once told about a boy named Matthew who went missing in the 1932nd. His family lived in Bear Creek, just a few miles away. One summer afternoon, he wandered into the woods chasing a stray dog. Hours passed, then days. Searchers combed every ridge, every stream bed. They found the dog alive, curled at the edge of the barren circle, but Matthew was never found. His parents swore they heard his voice calling out for weeks afterward, drifting from the trees each dusk, always too far to follow. Some neighbors still claim the woods around Devil's Tramping Ground echo faint, childlike laughter at twilight. That memory clamped onto Emily's chest as another sound reached her ears. Faint footsteps, crunch, pause, crunch. She whirled, headlamp flashing through the pines. The light snagged on bark and bramble, but no person. The noise stopped when she stopped, resumed when she moved. She thought of leaving something to mark her way, finally taking the advice she had dismissed. She tore a strip of red fabric from her flannel sleeve and tied it to a low branch. But as she moved further down the trail, a chill prickled her neck. Glancing back, she froze. The fabric was gone. The branch was bare. Emily's breathing quickened. "Not possible," she whispered. She tied another strip, tugged hard to be sure. Minutes later, it too vanished, leaving no trace she'd ever touched the tree. The deeper meaning pressed against her thoughts again. Maybe these rules weren't about superstition at all, they were about survival. Boundaries exist in life, and ignoring them often leads to ruin. Maybe the Devil's Tramping Ground enforced that idea more directly, punishing arrogance, rewarding caution. The woods didn't care about human curiosity. They only demanded respect. Her lamp flickered, dim once, twice. She smacked it with her palm, but the glow weakened. She slowed, letting her eyes adjust to the faint moonlight dripping through branches. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then came the whispers. At first they blended with the breeze, indistinct, like fragments of a conversation overheard through walls. She could almost make out syllables. A name? Her name? Emily. The sound tightened her stomach. No one knew she was here. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Her instinct screamed, "Mark the path. Don't stop. Keep moving." She stumbled forward, gripping her straps as the whispers grew louder, circling, never pinpointed. For a second, she thought she saw the faint glow of her missing red fabric tied ahead, but when she reached it, it was only moonlight cutting across twisted branches. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears as she quickened her pace. Behind her, the crunching steps returned, deliberate, steady. Someone or something was following, unseen. She repeated the rule aloud to steady herself. Always mark the path or risk never finding your way back. But here, at the Devil's Tramping Ground, the woods seemed to rewrite even that rule, reminding her she wasn't the one in control. Emily adjusted her backpack straps, her breath puffing in white clouds against the cold night air. The fifth rule played again in her head. Never build a fire inside the circle. Simple enough, she thought, except the deeper she went, the more tempting the idea became. The darkness was pressing in on her like a living thing. She finally stopped at a clearing, well away from the barren circle, but close enough to sense its emptiness behind her. She dug out her small camping stove, reminding herself that legends warned anyone who lit a flame inside the circle would see it snuffed out instantly, or worse, wake up surrounded by scorched ground as though something else had been feeding the fire. The rule wasn't just folklore. Historical records backed it up. In 1929, a group of University of North Carolina students camped overnight to prove the stories false. They set a fire in the very heart of the circle. Local papers later reported their logs burned strangely, one side blackened to ash while the other remained untouched. By morning, the fire pit was gone, the ground beneath it smooth and bare. Some skeptics claimed the kids staged it, but none of the students would speak about what they truly saw that night. The most telling clue? None of them ever returned to the site again. Emily thought of that story as she poured water into a small pan. The flame of her stove danced weakly, bending as though blown by a phantom breath. She moved closer, shielding it with her hand, but the air wasn't moving. No breeze, no wind, just a pressure, heavy and deliberate. Then, a strange event unfolded. Sparks popped, leaping higher than they should have. The flames rose blue for a moment, then green, shimmering unnaturally. She blinked, pulled the stove back, and whispered, "Not possible." When she looked again, the flame had gone out entirely. The metal was ice cold, as if it had never been lit. Was it the soil, full of minerals that bent fire, or something else entirely? Paranormal researchers argue that fire is a boundary, a human claim of safety against the night. If the devil's tramping ground truly belongs to something darker, maybe fire becomes an intrusion, a challenge. Do ghosts, or demons, for that matter, snuff out what doesn't belong in their territory? Or was it just chemistry we don't yet understand? The academic debate remains open, and Emily found herself smack in the middle of it. Her mind drifted back to a true story from 1985. A hunter named Robert Daniels was reported missing after heading into Chatham County woods near the circle. Searchers eventually found his rifle and hunting knife neatly propped against a stump. His campfire was reduced to a ring of cold gray stones, untouched by soot. Strangely, his bedroll remained packed, as if he'd never settled in. Robert himself was never recovered. His brother claimed for years afterward that every time he lit a fire in his own backyard, it hissed and popped violently, like some unseen force mocking him. Emily chewed on a granola bar, her stomach tight, her thoughts restless. If Robert's fire had been erased, was the same thing happening to her stove? She touched the pan again, still cold. She stuffed it back into her pack, unwilling to test it further. The silence around her deepened until it became a weight pressing against her eardrums. That's when she noticed a faint glow far behind her, back toward the circle. It pulsed low and steady, like coal still smoldering. But she hadn't lit anything there. Had she? Emily's breath caught. Her mind reeled. Could someone else have come? Or was the land mocking her, showing her the very fire she wasn't allowed to create? The lesson pressed harder now. Some rules aren't made to be bent. They're warnings, built from centuries of fear and consequence. Fire, the oldest human defense, had no place here. Maybe it wasn't just superstition. Maybe the circle demanded submission, stripping away the comforts of mankind until nothing remained but vulnerability. She wrapped her arms around her knees, whispering into the dark, "I won't light a fire. I get it." The woods did not answer, but the glow near the circle flickered once, as if in acknowledgement, before vanishing into the night. Emily pressed forward, shoulders aching under the weight of her pack. but the forest refused to grow lighter. Even with dawn creeping somewhere far off, the woods felt suspended in a false midnight, the kind where your body insists time is broken. The sixth rule replayed in her mind: never accept gifts or food left on the ground. It sounded ridiculous the first time she'd read it, like something out of a fairy tale. But rules didn't get written for no reason. As she pushed through the underbrush, she spotted a mason jar sitting neatly at the base of an oak. The jar glowed faintly, not with fireflies, but with a murky amber liquid sloshing thickly inside. A folded scrap of paper rested beneath it, damp from dew yet untouched by rot. Her pulse quickened. This was no accident. Emily crouched low, remembering how old superstitions warned of offerings in cursed places, bait left by spirits to lure wanderers closer. She thought of Appalachian lore, how witches supposedly left charms for travelers, small tokens to trick them into bargains they didn't know they'd made. The historical precedent wasn't comforting either. In 1932, locals told of a farmer named Charles Griffin, who ignored the warnings. He found a bundle of apples wrapped in cloth, placed directly in the circle. He ate 2 before collapsing in his barn later that night, his stomach seized in agony. Some swore he died of poisoning. Others whispered the apples never left the circle at all, that they reappeared there the following morning, untouched and perfectly fresh. Emily stepped back, resisting the pull. Her throat was dry, her energy fading. That's when the strange event began. She heard the sound of chewing, slow, deliberate, wet chewing. It came not from her, but from somewhere to her right, just beyond the thicket of pines. She froze. The sound stopped, then resumed again, closer, like something savoring every bite. "Who's there?" she called softly, her voice breaking the hush. The chewing ceased entirely. The jar at her feet rattled once, as if something inside it had stirred. Emily recoiled, backing up until her boots caught on the root. Do ghosts leave food as traps? Or was this psychological, the mind conjuring hunger and hallucination in the dead of night? Paranormal researchers debate whether offerings in haunted sites are placed by humans as rituals or by forces beyond human hands. Was this just folklore materializing through her exhaustion? Or was she brushing against rules older than science could frame? She remembered another true story, one that made her skin prickle. In the late 1962, a young woman named Linda Poe had been dared by friends to camp near the circle. According to her surviving journal, she found a loaf of bread left neatly on the rock. Despite her better judgment, she ate 2 slices. By morning, her friends found her wandering barefoot in the woods, incoherent, repeating the same phrase. "He gave it to me. I said thank you. I said thank you." She never returned to full clarity of mind, spending the rest of her life in a sanitarium. Emily's jaw tightened. She couldn't afford to be Linda. She kicked dirt over the jar and note, shoving them deeper beneath the soil and leaves. But her instinct screamed she hadn't solved anything, only provoked whatever had left them there. The forest silence returned, heavier now, pulsing like a heartbeat. A faint metallic taste coated her tongue, though she hadn't eaten a thing. And then, in the dark, a whisper drifted through the trees. Just one word, carried in the air like smoke. "Thanks." Emily bolted forward, refusing to look back. She wasn't sure what she'd declined or what debt she'd avoided, but she knew the rule was clear for a reason. In places like this, every gift carried a hook. The deeper lesson wrapped itself around her like the fog curling at her ankles. Some temptations were meant to be indulged. Refusing them wasn't weakness, it was survival. Still, as she ran, her stomach twisted with hunger, and in her ears, the phantom chewing carried on, just behind her. Emily's breath came in sharp bursts, every inhale scraping her throat as she pushed through the suffocating underbrush. The circle seemed to stretch the woods endlessly, paths folding back on themselves as if the ground rearranged beneath her boots. Her phone's compass spun aimlessly, its needle jerking like a nervous twitch. And the seventh rule thundered in her head: never follow voices that call your name. It was already happening. The first time, it was faint, almost too easy to dismiss. A woman's voice, lilting and warm, drifting between the pines. Emily, soft, sing-song, the way her grandmother used to call her to dinner. She froze mid-step. It couldn't be real. No one was out here. Emily, this time, firmer, closer. A chill surged up her spine. She turned, but the darkness was unbroken. Every tree identical, every shadow stretching too far. She forced her feet forward, whispering loud, "It's not real, it's not real." The history of this rule made her skin crawl. Locals spoke of a Civil War soldier named Samuel Hargrove who deserted his regiment and fled into these woods, trying to escape patrols. For days, villagers searched for him, only to hear his own mother's voice echoing in the trees, calling him home. Weeks later, his uniform was discovered at the circle's edge, neatly folded, with no body inside. Some said he'd been tricked into walking somewhere beyond the reach of the living. Emily pressed her hands over her ears, but the voice only grew louder, bypassing flesh and bone, whispering directly into her skull. "Emily, over here." She stumbled, panic clawing at her ribs. And then another voice, male this time, familiar. "Emily, it's me, Dad." Her knees nearly buckled. Her father had been gone 3 years, lung cancer stealing him too soon. The thought that his voice was floating in this cursed place made her chest ache. For a heartbeat, she considered stepping toward it, just to be sure. That's when the strange event hit her like a punch. The air changed. A breeze carried the unmistakable smell of hospital disinfectant, the same sterile, chemical sharpness she remembered from his final days. It lingered in the trees, too real to be imagined. She knew better. The circle didn't resurrect loved ones. It only mimicked them. But the pull was unbearable. Academic debate lingers over whether auditory hallucinations in haunted places are products of stress or evidence of intelligent haunting. Some researchers insist it's the brain cracking under isolation, recycling familiar voices to fill the void. Others argue the specificity, the intimate details, like a parent's exact inflection, pushes the phenomenon beyond mere psychology. Standing there, Emily wasn't interested in theories. She only knew the voices wanted her to move closer. And she remembered a true story told by a local teacher, Mrs. Henley, who brought high school students on a folklore project in the 1982nd. One student, Jeremy Pike, swore he heard his younger sister crying in the woods. Against instructions, he followed. His classmates never saw him again. All they found was his notebook, pages torn out and scattered like breadcrumbs. The final words scrawled, "She needs me. I hear her." Emily clutched her backpack straps like anchors. Grounding herself, "No," she whispered. "Not this time." But the voices multiplied. Dozens now, overlapping in the chorus. Friends, co-workers, strangers, each one using her name like they'd known her forever. Her legs trembled, her sanity strained. She bolted forward, aiming for the faintest gap of moonlight between trees. Branches whipped her face, voices chasing like hounds, calling her name in perfect unison. "Emily! Emily!" She broke into a clearing, chest burning. The silence that followed was worse. No voices, no wind, just the circle again, its dead earth yawning before her, daring her to step in. Her throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to resist. The rules weren't guidelines anymore. They were lifelines. She hadn't followed the voices. And because of that, she was still breathing. Still, in the back of her mind, doubt whispered, what if one of those calls had really been her father? What if survival meant ignoring something genuine, something precious? The forest didn't answer. It never did. But she walked on, haunted by the question. Emily's body felt hollow, like her bones were hollow reeds rattling in the wind. Each step deeper into the forest stole something from her warmth, her clarity, her sense of direction. She wasn't sure if she was moving forward anymore or just circling endlessly. That's when the eighth and final rule pulsed through her skull like a drumbeat. If you see a fire burning in the circle, do not approach it. The circle had always been tied to flames. Folklore said the ground itself was scorched by the devil's nightly bonfire, his dance burning the earth until nothing would grow. Skeptics argued it was soil composition, high salt content, or maybe some strange underground heat source. But the rule was older than the skeptics, passed down through whispers. If you saw fire there, you'd be tempted to walk straight into it. And tonight, temptation flickered. She saw it through the trees first, a glow too steady, too controlled to be moonlight, an orange shimmer licking upward as though some unseen camper had lit a blaze in defiance of the circle's curse. Emily's heart stumbled. A fire meant people. People meant help. She could almost feel relief breaking through her panic, but her gut twisted. She remembered the farmer's tale from the 1932nd. A man named Clyde Bowers had wandered drunk into the circle one autumn night, bragging to locals he'd share whiskey with the devil himself. They found him the next morning on the far side of the woods, barefoot and incoherent, lips blistered as if he'd drunk from coals. He never spoke clearly again, mumbling about flames that sing. Her body leaned forward against her will, drawn like a moth. She gritted her teeth and planted her feet. The fire flared brighter. She saw figures, now shapes, dancing around it, their shadows long and jerky, arms stretching too far, legs bending the wrong way. They laughed, but the laughter sounded broken, like glass grinding underfoot. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispering, "Not real, not real." But when she opened them, one figure had stepped away from the circle, a man. His outline looked whole, human. He stopped just at the edge, lifted his hand, and waved her closer. And then he spoke in her father's voice again. "Emily, come to the fire. You are so cold." Her throat closed. The smell of smoke thickened, sharp and acrid, searing her lungs. She coughed violently, the taste of ash coating her tongue. The fire wasn't just illusion, it had presence, heat, smell. Academic circles still argue whether such manifestations are mass hallucinations or objective phenomena. Some point to mass magnetic anomalies recorded near the circle, capable of interfering with human perception. Others, more superstitious, suggest the devil doesn't bother with illusions. He simply borrows what's already inside you, magnifying your worst desires. Emily didn't care which theory was right. She just knew the blaze was calling her like a lighthouse in a storm. But it wasn't guiding her home, it was pulling her under. Her mind snagged on another true story she'd overheard from a park ranger in Chatham County. A hiker in 2005 had gone missing near the circle. His last text to his wife sent at 2:43 a.m. "I see a fire. Going to check it out." His phone pinged from inside the circle, but no body was ever recovered. Locals claimed they still saw his silhouette among the dancers some nights. Emily shook her head hard, forcing her legs backward. She turned away, every nerve screaming as though she were tearing Velcro apart inside her brain. The fire roared louder, the shadows shrieked her name, and her skin prickled with the heat of flames she wasn't standing near. Then black. No glow, no shadows, no sound. Just the dead circle, silent under the weight of the stars. Her knees gave way. She collapsed to the ground, sobs racking her chest, exhaustion flooding in like a tide. She didn't know how long she sat there, clutching her arms around herself. Minutes, hours' time folded strangely in a circle. When the first gray light of dawn finally brushed the trees, Emily felt it like a blessing. The air smelled clean again, the voices gone, the fire nothing more than memory. Her body ached as she stumbled toward the faint noise of a highway in the distance. She didn't look back. She couldn't. But one thought clung to her like morning fog. Survival had nothing to do with strength. It had everything to do with restraint, resisting the voices, resisting the warmth of the fire, resisting the pull of things that preyed on loneliness and grief. The circle was not just a patch of barren earth. It was a mirror. And what you brought inside it, your regrets, your weaknesses, your buried ghosts, was what would burn you alive if you let it. Emily walked out, battered but breathing, carrying the final unspoken rule: sometimes the only way to win is not to play. And so, the forest quiets. The rules linger, but softer now, like fading echoes rather than screaming demands. Emily is gone, her footprints swallowed by pine needles and morning light. All that remains is the circle, still barren, still waiting for the next soul bold or foolish enough to test it. If you're still awake, let your mind loosen its grip on the firelight and voices. Imagine instead the hush of dawn, the way air feels cleaner after a storm has passed. The circle will always be there, but you don't have to step into it. Not tonight. Not ever. Think about how easy it is to follow voices that promise comfort, even when you know they can't be trusted. Think about the warmth of a fire that isn't yours, one that wants to consume instead of protect. The lesson hides in the spaces between fear and desire. The things that tempt us most often lead us furthest astray. So tonight, as you close your eyes, let the rules do their work. Not just as warnings about a patch of cursed earth in North Carolina, but as quiet reminders about life outside the woods. Stay steady. Don't follow every call. Don't step into every flame. Survival, in its simplest form, is choosing not to give in. The night is long, but it isn't endless. And sometimes the most haunting stories remind us not of monsters out there in the dark, but of the strength it takes to walk past them, head bowed, heart steady, until the light returns.